The morning he looked me in the eye over my own kitchen table and said, "It's time you started paying rent, Mom." My hand tightened around my coffee mug as I felt my blood beginning to boil. For a split second, I wondered if he was joking. But then I saw that little tramp Tiffany leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed, her manicure gleaming like a trophy. Ryan avoided my gaze and stared down at the printed lease papers spread like a trap between us. And in that moment, I felt like a tenant in the house I bought with his father. My son, the boy I'd carried when my back still ached from double shifts at the store, had come into my kitchen with his wife and a contract to charge me rent. I asked him if he remembered whose name was on the deed, and his answer, "Things change, Mom," signaled the start of a messy battle I sure as hell wasn't going to back down from. Before I continue, please consider subscribing to this channel if you enjoy hearing these true stories, and leave a comment to let me know what you're doing as you listen. Little Ethan's toy truck sat abandoned on the tile by the pantry, forgotten while his parents calculated monthly payments down to the cent, and I wanted to scream. Tiffany's voice cut through the tension with rehearsed politeness as she explained that everyone has to contribute, as if the decades I spent working overtime to pay off this roof meant nothing. She handed me a pen with a fake smile and said that Ryan didn't want to be stuck paying everything forever, and she tapped the column that said $1,200. I felt like I was being audited in my own kitchen, and the same woman who posted designer handbags on social media was telling me about fairness and budgets. There was a heat in my chest that I hadn't felt since the day I buried my husband, and I realized my son had left his spine somewhere between his college dorm and Tiffany's Instagram. The wall clock chimed the half hour, and in that long second, I thought about the nights I stayed up sewing and how many lunches I skipped so Ryan could have soccer cleats. It wasn't just the demand for rent that cut me, it was the way he flinched like a boy scared to disappoint his wife, and I saw how much power she held. Tiffany reached out and tapped the stack of paper again, this time more insistent, and her perfume was so strong that it masked the familiar scent of Folgers I had brewed at dawn. The coffee had gone cold, but the anger in me burned hotter, and I imagined my husband's calloused hands on this very table, signing loan documents in 1987 so we could buy this house. "If you don't sign by the 1st, we'll have to reconsider your living arrangements," Tiffany said, and my heart skipped as I realized my own child was threatening to evict me. I swallowed hard and looked at Ryan, searching for the boy who used to bring me dandelions. But instead, I saw a man who chose his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. The room felt smaller than ever, as if the walls were inching closer with each word Tiffany spoke, and I wondered how long she'd been planning this conversation. I decided then and there that I would not let them bully me, but I also knew that any misstep could cost me the only grandchild I had ever held. My jaw clenched as I calmly told them I needed time to think, and I watched Tiffany's smile falter, as if she didn't expect me to push back at all. Ryan shuffled the papers and said they'd give me until Friday. Then he reached down and picked up Ethan's toy truck, a small gesture that reminded me of simpler years. They left the lease on the table, the signatures blank like open wounds, and walked out of my kitchen without a goodbye, leaving me staring at my reflection in the window. As their car backed out of my driveway, I sank into the chair and let the silence settle, interrupted only by the clock ticking and the distant laughter of a neighbor mowing his lawn. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I ran my fingers along the grooves our family had carved into this table over the years, and I made a silent promise not to lose this home. That night, I pulled out the old photo album from the hall closet, the one with yellowing pages, and flipped through snapshots of Ryan as a toddler, chewing on crayons in this very kitchen. I remembered my husband sanding the porch rail on a windy Saturday, the smell of sawdust mixing with the salt air, and I wondered what he would say if he had been here to witness this. Sleep evaded me as the tick of the clock grew louder and the numbers on the lease swirled in my head like a storm, And I knew this was no simple misunderstanding. By dawn, I had decided I needed advice, not from my son, but from someone who understood rights and respect. I wasn't going to sign away my power without a fight. The next morning, I called my old friend Linda, a retired paralegal who spent 30 years working at the county clerk's office, and asked if she could come over for coffee. When she arrived, I could see the curiosity in her eyes as she took in the lease on my table, and she listened patiently as I recounted the confrontation word for word. Linda shook her head, her silver hair catching the morning light, and she told me that elder financial abuse often starts at kitchen tables with polite demands. She explained that California law defines financial elder abuse as taking or retaining an older adult's property or assets without consent. And my stomach tightened because that's exactly what Tiffany was attempting. Linda reminded me that joint accounts, deeds, and wills aren't just family matters. They're legal contracts with rules and protections, and she offered to help me review every document Ryan had left. We poured coffee, Folgers from the red can I always bought on sale, and sat down together with a legal pad ready to dig into what belonged to me and what my son thought belonged to him. As we read through the lease, my friend pointed to a clause about failure to pay, and she leaned forward and whispered that no one can remove a co-owner from a joint bank account without consent. She also reminded me that California is a two-party consent state, and that I couldn't legally record conversations without everyone agreeing, so any evidence would have to come from documents and witnesses. Her words were grounding, and for the first time since Ryan's ultimatum, I felt a glimmer of control, because I realized there were laws on my side and steps I could take. Linda advised me not to change any locks or shut off utilities, reminding me that landlords cannot change the locks, shut off power, or remove property to force a tenant out, even if the tenant is your own child. She said that if things escalated, the only lawful way to evict someone in California is by filing a court case and waiting 30 to 45 days for an order, and that gave me time to plan. Hearing that eviction cases could take at least a month to resolve and must be handled by sheriffs calmed me, because it meant they couldn't just kick me out overnight no matter how aggressive Tiffany got. Linda's common sense and decades of blue-collar experience grounded me, and when she said she'd seen adult children try to bully their parents into signing homes away, I felt less alone. She clasped my hand and told me that I'd been more than generous with Ryan, and that fairness didn't mean surrendering the equity I'd built after 39 years of mortgage payments. As the afternoon sun warmed the kitchen, I decided to get organized, so I pulled down my metal lockbox from the closet shelf and spread out my deed, mortgage release, will, and the joint savings statements on the table. The deed still had my name and my late husband's name on it, with a right of survivorship clause, meaning the house fully belonged to me after he passed, and I felt the weight of that in my chest. I hadn't changed my will since Ethan was born 2 years ago, and I realized I needed to revisit the documents that decided who got what when I was gone, because clearly assumptions could turn into weapons. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a yellow legal pad and started writing a timeline of events. When Ryan moved back in after college, when Tiffany joined him, how often they promised to save for their own place, and the day they asked me for $5,000 for their wedding. Listing the numbers and dates gave me clarity, and it also reminded me of how often I had stepped in as a safety net without asking for anything in return. When I reached the line where they decided to stop contributing groceries because Tiffany wanted clean eating from Whole Foods, I let out a dry laugh and shook my head at how quickly the scales had tipped. The more I wrote, the more I saw patterns of entitlement. The way they insisted on controlling the thermostat, the time Tiffany removed my family photos from the living room because they clashed with her minimalist aesthetic, and the conversation we'd just had. Despite my anger, there was still love for my son, and that love complicated everything because I also knew he was a father now, and Ethan deserved a relationship with his grandmother. Before I go any deeper, let me ask you, Where are you listening from? And have you ever had to draw a hard line with family? Because this is where my story truly begins. After Linda left, I brewed another pot of coffee and took a deep breath, determined to understand every financial angle before confronting Ryan again, because numbers don't lie even when people do. I pulled up my online banking from my old Dell desktop, the one with sticky keys, and scrolled through our joint savings account, which held $23,450. Money I had socked away for emergencies, not adult children's lifestyle upgrades. On the screen, I saw several transfers labeled car payment and furniture, and I realized that Ryan had been dipping into our account without telling me, which was a violation of trust and a sign he viewed my money as his own. My heart raced as I called the bank's customer service line. A polite woman with a southern accent confirmed that no account holder can remove another from a joint account without consent, and that both names remained on file. She also explained that any account holder can withdraw funds, which meant Ryan's transfers weren't technically illegal, but they were certainly unethical, and I thanked her for the clarity. As I hung up, I remembered that the simplest solution to joint account abuse is to close the account, and she said I had the right to do so unilaterally since it was a joint or account, but that I should transfer my funds first. I scheduled an appointment at the local Chase branch for Thursday because I wanted to speak with a banker face-to-face and get the process started before Ryan realized I was moving. I always liked that branch, nestled next to a Safeway because the tellers knew my name and offered lollipops to Ethan when I brought him in, and that small-town familiarity gave me courage. The following day, I met with a young banker named Emily, who reminded me of a niece, and she walked me through how to close our joint savings and open a new account solely in my name. Emily confirmed that no one could remove me from an account without my consent, and that any co-owner could close the account. And she also recommended I freeze the account before closing to prevent new withdrawals. She printed out forms and highlighted the sections where I needed to sign, her blue pen gliding over dotted lines, and in 10 minutes, my $23,450 was safely transferred into a new savings account with my name only. As I walked out of the bank, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, the first tangible step I'd taken to protect myself, and I realized I wasn't as powerless as Tiffany wanted me to believe. I drove my old Toyota Camry to the county records office, the same car I'd driven for 12 years with a faded bumper sticker that read, "Proud Grandma," and parked in the sun-drenched lot. Inside the clerk's office, dusty file drawers and beige paint reminded me of the 1990s, and I requested a certified copy of my property deed, wanting to double-check that no liens or transfers had been recorded without my knowledge. The clerk returned with a crisp copy, and as I held it in my hands, the black-inked words, "Grant Deed," and my own signature from 1987 reminded me that this home was still legally mine. On the way home, I stopped by Home Depot to pick up a new door handle for the guest room, because even in the midst of financial drama, life's little maintenance tasks don't pause, and the smell of lumber calmed my nerves. Standing in the hardware aisle, the overhead speakers played a classic rock tune while I selected a $28 brushed nickel handle, and the young cashier chatted about his mom as he scanned the barcode. Back at home, I decided to take a break and scroll through my phone, and that's when a video popped up from a YouTube channel called Grace's Stories, where a woman about my age shared a tale about her children trying to take her house. Listening to Grace recount how she discovered her adult children scheming behind her back, my eyes widened. It sounded eerily similar to my situation, and her calm yet firm resolve inspired me. Grace talked about consulting a lawyer and gathering documentation, and she mentioned how important it was to stay level-headed because anger alone doesn't win. Strategy does. Hearing that validated my plan to proceed carefully. I left a comment on her video thanking her for her honesty and saying her story gave me strength, and I felt connected to a community of women who refused to let age make them invisible. By dinner time, my stomach was in knots, thinking about the conversation I needed to have with Ryan. And as I stirred a pot of Campbell's tomato soup, I wondered how to approach him without burning every bridge. I considered writing him a letter, but that seemed too distant, and calling him felt like giving Tiffany a chance to intercept. So I decided to invite him over alone, telling him it was urgent and private. When he showed up on Thursday evening, he came alone, which surprised me. And he looked tired. I could tell Tiffany was at a yoga class or a wine tasting because he was free to speak without eyes on him. We sat on the porch, the cool spring breeze rustling the wind chimes, and I offered him a glass of iced tea, hoping to soften the moment with a familiar ritual from his childhood. I calmly told him I knew about the withdrawals from our joint account and that I'd already moved the money, and his face flushed as if he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He stammered that he needed help with a new car because Tiffany's Lexus RX lease payment was due, and I reminded him that I had already given them $4,000 toward that down payment last year. Ryan mumbled an apology, but quickly shifted, saying Tiffany felt I should contribute monthly because her friends' parents all do, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the idea of following Tiffany's circle like a rule book. I told him the house was paid off, that the deed was mine, and that I didn't owe him rent. I also mentioned that forcing a parent to sign over property without consent falls under elder financial abuse. He seemed taken aback by the term abuse, and I clarified that it wasn't an accusation yet, but a warning. I loved him, but I wouldn't allow manipulation disguised as modern fairness. He leaned back, playing with the condensation on his glass, and whispered that Tiffany had been pressuring him to step up and take control, and my heart broke for the boy still seeking approval. I asked him if he wanted me to stay or if he was trying to push me out to make space for their Pinterest perfect life, and he hesitated, which told me everything I needed to know. He finally admitted that Tiffany wanted to remodel the kitchen and needed me to contribute or move out because she didn't want to invest in a house that wasn't legally hers, and I nearly laughed at the audacity. Instead of yelling, I told him that if they wanted their own kitchen, they could save up and buy their own house. This one was mine, and while he and his family were welcome, there would be respect and boundaries. I also told him I wasn't against paying my share of utilities or groceries, but a formal rent agreement and threats of eviction were off the table. We could revisit contributions once their spending habits changed. Ryan nodded slowly, seeming to weigh my words against Tiffany's expectations, and I could see the conflict behind his eyes as he grappled with loyalty to his mother versus fear of marital tension. Before he left, I handed him a copy of the printed definition of elder financial abuse and a summary of California eviction law, highlighting where it states that landlords can't change locks or evict without court action. I told him that I hoped he would show these to Tiffany because I wanted her to understand that the law views what they were doing as potentially abusive, and I didn't want things to get uglier. He hugged me awkwardly, something he hadn't done in months, and whispered that he loved me, and I told him I loved him too, but that love includes accountability and honesty, not silent submission. After he left, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset bleed orange and pink over the neighborhood roofs, and I wondered whether he would share our conversation with Tiffany or hide it out of fear. I took Ethan's toy truck from the corner of the porch and placed it in the living room as a reminder of what was really at stake. A little boy's sense of family and belonging. In the days that followed, the air felt tense. Tiffany avoided me and retreated to her room or left the house whenever I was around, and I could hear her whispering on the phone to someone named Brooke, complaining about difficult in-laws. Ethan sensed the tension. He clung to me more at breakfast, his small fingers sticky with syrup as he insisted on feeding me tiny bites of pancake, and his innocence made my resolve stronger. Sunday afternoon, I overheard Tiffany on the phone telling her mother that Carol is being unreasonable and selfish, and she used that sing-song voice she reserves for compliments she doesn't mean. I didn't confront her. Instead, I took my coffee out to the backyard and watched the hummingbirds dart around the feeder I had hung last spring, reminding myself to stay calm because anger would only feed her narrative. On Monday, Ryan asked if he could bring over some friends from work to discuss a business idea in the dining room, and I agreed, even though it felt like an intrusion, hoping it might lighten the mood. His colleagues arrived wearing khakis and talking about startup valuations. I retreated to the den with a crossword puzzle, but the conversation drifted to me when Tiffany mentioned I was retired and looking for ways to downsize. One man suggested that older homeowners could sell their houses to invest in high-yield bonds, and Tiffany chimed in that she'd seen a video online about reverse mortgages that let seniors tap into equity, clearly trying to plant seeds. I gritted my teeth but remained silent. I knew that selling my house or taking a reverse mortgage would only give them more reason to assume my money belonged to them, and I wasn't about to entertain that. Later that week, I decided to consult with an attorney, so I called a local law office and scheduled a consultation for Thursday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, wanting professional advice before Tiffany could spring any surprises. The attorney, Mr. Hernandez, practiced family and estate law for 25 years, and when I sat in his office surrounded by books and diplomas, I felt both intimidated and relieved. I told him about the lease, the joint account withdrawals, and my fear of losing my home, and he listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions about timelines and contributions. Mr. Hernandez confirmed that adult children asking for rent from a parent who owns the home can sometimes be considered financial elder abuse, especially if accompanied by threats of eviction or manipulation. He advised me to document everything, including conversations and dates, and to avoid recording conversations without consent because California is a two-party consent state, which I nodded to. He explained the eviction process again, emphasizing that landlords cannot lock out tenants or shut off utilities, and he recommended sending a formal notice if I ever wanted them to leave, but that I should think carefully before taking that step. He also suggested drafting a new will and trust to protect my assets and ensure that my wishes were clear, so there could be no confusion or contesting after I was gone. Mr. Hernandez handed me a list of documents to gather: tax returns, mortgage release, titles, bank statements, and referred me to a financial advisor who specialized in elder clients. As I drove home from his office, I stopped at a Walgreens pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication, and the pharmacist recognized me, remarking that I looked stressed, which made me chuckle despite everything. I realized then how much this ordeal was affecting my health, and I reminded myself to keep taking my medications on time and to get enough sleep because I needed a clear head to navigate this. That evening, I sat down with my lockbox again and sorted through years of bank statements, noticing the steady decline in my savings since Ryan and Tiffany moved back in, and I circled suspicious transactions in red ink. I even found receipts for a $999 fancy espresso machine and a $1,200 sectional sofa purchased with my credit card, both items that now sat proudly in my living room as if they appeared by magic. Anger simmered, but I channeled it into organization, creating a binder labeled Evidence, with tabs for bank statements, emails, text transcripts, and printed definitions of elder abuse, because I knew I might need it. On Saturday morning, Tiffany waltzed into the kitchen wearing expensive yoga pants and asked if I could watch Ethan because she had a spa appointment, her tone implying I had nothing better to do. I agreed to watch my grandson because he deserved love regardless of the storm around him, and I took him to the park where he squealed as he went down the slide, his laughter cutting through my worries. At the park, another grandmother struck up a conversation and told me about her daughter trying to take her savings. And for a moment, I felt like the world was full of whispered stories we were taught not to share. She mentioned she had called AARP's helpline for advice, and that they pointed her to resources on elder financial abuse, and I made a mental note to call them as well. That afternoon, I called AARP, and the representative confirmed that what Ryan and Tiffany were doing fit the pattern of financial exploitation. She directed me to online resources and support groups. Listening to other seniors' experiences in an online forum made me feel less alone, and I read posts from women named Mary and June who had faced similar betrayals and found ways to regain control. I posted my own story anonymously, and within hours I received supportive comments telling me to stay strong and to remember that boundaries are not unkind, they are necessary. On Monday, I went to see the financial advisor Mr. Hernandez recommended. She was a woman about my age named Karen, and she greeted me with a warm handshake and a stack of brochures. Karen explained what a living trust was and how it could protect my assets while I was alive and ensure a clear transfer after my death. She drew diagrams and answered all my questions patiently. She suggested placing my house into a revocable living trust with me as the trustee and beneficiary, which would allow me to live in it and make decisions, while also deterring anyone from contesting ownership later. She also recommended separating my emergency fund into a money market account and adjusting my beneficiary designations to ensure Ethan received something without giving Ryan unfettered access. We talked about long-term care insurance and the rising costs of assisted living, numbers that made me shiver, but planning ahead gave me comfort because I didn't want to rely on Ryan or Tiffany if I needed care. Karen brought up the importance of reviewing my homeowner's insurance, and she mentioned companies like State Farm and GEICO. I realized I hadn't compared rates in a decade and scribbled a note to call them. As I left her office, I passed by a State Farm ad in the lobby with the slogan, "Here to help life go right," and I snorted softly at the irony given my current situation. Driving home, I stopped at a CVS to pick up Ethan's favorite fruit snacks and a fresh pack of sticky notes. The cashier scanned my items and told me to have a blessed day, and I smiled. Later that night, Tiffany burst into the kitchen with a shopping bag from Nordstrom and slammed it on the counter, complaining loudly that I was meddling by closing the joint account and that Ryan had just told her. She accused me of being selfish and said that her mother thought it was common sense for parents to pay rent if they live with their kids, and I calmly asked her where her mother lived, hinting at hypocrisy. Tiffany's cheeks reddened. She muttered something about her mother's condo in Naples, Florida, and then she hurled the lease onto the counter, demanding to know why I refused to sign. I told her I'd consulted an attorney and that the lease was invalid because I was the homeowner, and I said that any future arrangements would be discussed when she and Ryan contributed fairly. She scoffed and called me old-fashioned, accusing me of not understanding modern shared living, and I responded by saying that respect and honesty never go out of style. For a moment, I saw fear flicker in her eyes, maybe at the realization that I would not be easily intimidated, and she turned on her heel and stormed back to her room, slamming the door. That door slam reverberated through the house like a shot, and I sat down at the kitchen table, noting the time, 7:42 in the evening, and making a note of the confrontation in my binder under incidents. Over the next week, I barely saw Tiffany. She retreated to her room or went out with friends, and when she did cross my path, she gave me cold stares and whispered with Ryan behind closed doors. I continued to collect evidence and document expenses. I made a spreadsheet showing that since they moved in, my utility bills had doubled and the grocery bills had increased by 40%, numbers I planned to show to Ryan. Meanwhile, Ryan avoided me. He left early for work and returned late, and when he did see me, he mumbled hello before disappearing into the bedroom. I could see the strain of being caught between us. On Friday, a letter arrived from Ryan's employer addressed to him, but it accidentally ended up in my pile of mail. I placed it on the counter with his name facing up, but curiosity nagged at me. I resisted the urge to open it, reminding myself that privacy matters even when trust erodes, but the sealed envelope lay there like a symbol of secrets between us. Saturday morning, I overheard Tiffany telling her mother on speakerphone that she was considering consulting a real estate agent about listing my house, as if she had the authority, and my blood boiled. I walked into the room and calmly reminded her that she did not have the legal right to list or sell my property, and that any such attempt would constitute fraud. She quickly ended the call. That evening, I invited my neighbor Marcia over for coffee. She'd lived next door for 20 years and was like a sister, and she had witnessed many of my family's milestones. I told Marcia what was happening, and she gasped, saying she had noticed Tiffany carrying boxes of my china to her car last week and had wondered why. My heart sank at the thought of hidden theft. Together we checked the china cabinet, and sure enough, several of my grandmother's plates were missing. I wrote down the missing pieces and called Ryan to ask where they were. He stammered that Tiffany had taken them to get them appraised at an antique store, and I told him to bring them back immediately. He promised he would, but days passed without their return. I began to suspect that more items were gone, so I went through my jewelry box and noticed my pearl earrings, the ones I wore on my wedding day, were missing. The box felt emptier, and tears welled. My voice shook as I asked Tiffany if she had seen them, and she rolled her eyes and said she hadn't been anywhere near my jewelry. Her denial felt rehearsed, and I resolved to file a police report if they didn't reappear. The next day, Ryan brought back the china plates and claimed it was a misunderstanding, but the pearl earrings never surfaced, and that loss felt like a small death, another piece of my past gone. I filed a report with the local police department for the missing jewelry, not because I expected to get it back, but to have an official record in case things escalated. The officer was kind and took notes. In his cruiser outside, I saw a car seat and a toddler snack cup. He told me his mom lived with him and his wife, and he shook his head when I explained why I was there, understanding in his eyes. That weekend, I received an invite to Ethan's daycare Grandparents' Day, an event I cherished, but Tiffany informed me coldly that only 2 adults per child were allowed, and that she and her mother would be attending. I felt my chest tighten. Using Ethan as leverage was an emotional punch, and I realized Tiffany knew how to hurt me without breaking any laws by denying me time with my grandson. I didn't argue. Instead, I mailed a small package to Ethan with a book and a note that said I loved him and would be thinking of him at daycare, and I kept the copy of the book for myself to read aloud at home. The next day, I took a drive down the coast to clear my head. The Pacific Ocean's endless horizon reminded me that my world was bigger than this conflict, and the sea air filled my lungs with crisp salt. I stopped at a Chevron station to fill up the Camry, and as I watched the numbers climb on the pump screen, I felt grateful for the small independence my car gave me. Inside the station, I grabbed a Diet Coke and exchanged pleasantries with the cashier, and he mentioned his mother loved crocheting, which made me smile thinking of the Afghans piled in my linen closet. Back home, I decided to take a small step to reclaim my space. I rearranged the living room furniture, moving the sectional that Tiffany insisted on to the other side, and placing my old wooden rocking chair by the window. The act of shifting furniture felt symbolic, a reminder that this house was mine and that I still had agency in the spaces I occupied, and the sun streamed in as if approving my decision. That evening, I cooked a pot roast in my crock pot, letting the aroma of carrots, onions, and garlic fill the house, and I hummed an old tune while setting the table with my everyday plates. Ryan emerged from the bedroom drawn by the smell, and he asked if he could join me. Tiffany was out with friends, so we sat down together like we hadn't in months. Between bites of tender meat, I asked him how he was feeling, and he sighed deeply, saying he felt torn and guilty but also overwhelmed by Tiffany's expectations, and he didn't know how to fix it. I told him that our relationship was on the line and that he needed to decide whether he was willing to stand up to his wife when she was wrong, because parents don't stop being parents when kids turn 30. He nodded slowly, his eyes moist, and whispered that he missed the days when things were simple. He confessed that he feared Tiffany would take Ethan away if he defied her, and my heart broke for his fear. I told him that good mothers-in-law don't demand obedience. They encourage independence and boundaries, and I reminded him that I had always encouraged him to make his own choices, not to be controlled. Our conversation ended with no immediate solution, but it reopened a door between us, and I saw flickers of the boy I raised, which gave me hope even as the situation remained fraught. 2 days later, Tiffany confronted me in the hallway, accusing me of turning Ryan against her. She said I was manipulating him with guilt, and that if I didn't stop, they would move out and cut me off from Ethan. Her threat hung in the air like a heavy fog. She was using my grandson as a bargaining chip, and I felt my maternal instincts flare. I refused to let her weaponize love. I calmly replied that relationships built on coercion don't last, and that if she chose to leave, that was her decision, but that I would not be blackmailed by access to my grandchild. The next morning, Ryan and Tiffany sat me down with solemn expressions and announced they had decided to move out within 60 days to find their own place, and Tiffany added that they expected me to help with the down payment. My jaw dropped. The audacity of expecting me to subsidize their departure after months of disrespect stunned me, and I took a breath to steady my voice before responding. I asked them how much they were planning to spend, and Tiffany said they had their eye on a $750,000 new construction home with an open-concept kitchen she loved, but they needed $75,000 for a down payment. I nearly choked on my water. I told them that my savings were for my retirement and that I would not be handing over $75,000, especially after their recent behavior. It was time for them to stand on their own. Tiffany's face contorted with anger, and she accused me of being cheap and unsupportive, of not caring about my grandson's future, and of trying to sabotage their dreams. I reminded her that I had given them money for their wedding, for their honeymoon, for their car, and that I housed them rent-free for 4 years. I'd always cared for their future, but boundaries mattered. Ryan sat silently, his shoulders tense, and after a moment he muttered that maybe they should look at smaller homes or condos, but Tiffany shot him a glare that silenced him instantly. I stood up and told them that if they wanted to move out, they were free to do so, but I would not be funding their lifestyle. My money would remain mine, and I would not sign any loans or co-sign. Tiffany stormed off, and Ryan followed, and as I listened to them argue behind their bedroom door, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief, because maybe this move would finally give us breathing room. Over the next weeks, I noticed them packing boxes slowly. Tiffany posted on social media about new beginnings, and Ryan avoided eye contact, and Ethan sensed something because he kept asking, "Nana coming?" I took Ethan to the park every chance I got because I didn't know how long I'd have that freedom. We collected pine cones and pretended they were dinosaur eggs, and his giggles were my fuel. One afternoon, Ryan asked if I would consider transferring the house into a joint trust so that it could avoid probate, which was Tiffany's latest scheme disguised as helpful legal advice. I told him I had already set up my own trust with the help of a professional, and that any changes would be my decision, not his, and he nodded, though his eyes darted. After dinner that night, I overheard Tiffany whispering on the phone again, this time saying she hoped the old bat would cave before the end of the month, and I jotted down the date and time. At this point, documenting her insults almost became a coping mechanism. The act of writing them down turned her words into evidence rather than daggers, and it reminded me I wasn't imagining the cruelty. The following week, a letter from their lender arrived addressed to me, which confused me. Inside was a pre-approval form with my name typed in as a co-signer, a line I had never signed. My heart pounded. They had attempted to use my information without my consent, and that wasn't just unethical, it was potentially criminal. I took the form straight to Mr. Hernandez's office. He confirmed that forging my signature or using my personal information without consent could constitute fraud, and he recommended I freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus and file a report, which I did that afternoon. I called Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion and placed freezes on my credit, reciting my social security number and answering security questions, and I felt a sense of relief as each representative confirmed the freeze. While on hold with Experian, I stared at the family portrait on my living room wall, taken in 2018 when Ethan was born. In the photo, Tiffany smiled brightly, and I wondered if she had always been this calculating. That night, I logged onto my Verizon account to review my cell phone bill, and I noticed dozens of calls to a local law office from Ryan's phone. I couldn't see the details, but I suspected they were seeking legal counsel of their own. It hit me then that this conflict was no longer just about a lease or a few missing plates. It had become a battle over my autonomy, my assets, and my role in my own family. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I realized I had done everything right, consulted professionals, protected my accounts, set up a trust, and now it was time to see their next move. The next morning, Tiffany asked if she could borrow my Costco membership card to buy bulk diapers for Ethan, and I said yes, but insisted I go with her, suspecting she wanted to use my card for other purchases. At Costco, the bright lights and towering shelves of toilet paper and cereal felt almost comforting. We loaded diapers, wipes, and chicken breasts into the cart, but Tiffany also tossed in a $250 blender and a stack of designer candles. At the checkout line, I told the cashier to separate our items. I paid for the diapers and wipes and told Tiffany she was welcome to pay for her blender with her own card, and the look on her face was priceless. Other shoppers glanced at us, and Tiffany whispered through gritted teeth that I was embarrassing her. I replied quietly that boundaries aren't embarrassing, they're healthy, and she rolled her eyes and paid. That afternoon, Tiffany told Ryan that I had humiliated her in public, and he asked me if I could be more understanding. But I simply said that financial boundaries are not personal attacks. The tension simmered like a pot about to boil over, and I knew that any day now something would give. I just didn't know whether it would be an explosion or a quiet exit. I continued to live my life. I went to church on Sundays, I met my friend Marcia for coffee at a local diner, and I kept up with my Silver Sneakers exercise classes at the community center. In the parking lot after class, my friend Doris mentioned she had changed her homeowner's insurance from Allstate to Progressive because the rates were better, and I made another note to call for quotes. Over the next few days, I noticed Ryan and Tiffany making more calls, whispering behind closed doors, and scanning documents late into the night, their printer humming like a cicada. I kept my binder updated, adding notes and printing email receipts. I felt like a detective in my own life, but the meticulous record-keeping gave me peace. One Wednesday afternoon, I returned from a trip to the post office and found a stranger in a suit standing on my front porch with a briefcase. He introduced himself as Alan from an estate buying company. He said he had been invited by Tiffany to appraise my house and offer a cash purchase, and he handed me a business card with glossy print. My eyes widened at the audacity. I asked him to step back, and I politely but firmly told him that no one had the authority to invite him onto my property except me, and that his services were not needed. Alan seemed embarrassed. He apologized, said Tiffany mentioned she had power of attorney, which was a lie, and he left quickly, but not before I wrote down his license plate number. Inside the house, I confronted Tiffany, and she said she was just exploring options. I told her that forging or lying about power of attorney is illegal, and she rolled her eyes as if I were overreacting. I informed Mr. Hernandez about Alan's visit, and he drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to Tiffany, warning her not to represent herself as my agent, and he mailed it certified. Tiffany received the letter 2 days later, and after reading it, she ripped it up and tossed the pieces in the trash in front of me, saying it wouldn't change her plans. I didn't respond verbally, but I took a photo of the ripped letter in the trash as further evidence. I was building a case not just of financial abuse, but of willful disregard for my rights. The situation escalated further when Ryan approached me and asked me to sign a document giving him temporary financial authority in case I became incapacitated, which was essentially a power of attorney. I declined, pointing out that I was still very capable of making my own decisions, and he tried to guilt me by saying it would be easier for hospitals and banks to work with him. I saw through it. I told him that if I ever needed help, I would appoint a trusted friend or a neutral third party, but that I did not trust him or Tiffany with such power at this time. I could see hurt in his eyes, but also a glimmer of shame. and I wondered if he knew deep down how inappropriate their requests had become. In the following days, Tiffany started turning off the air conditioner when I was home and turning it on high when I wasn't, as if to punish me with discomfort, and I wrote it down. She also moved my clothes from the master bedroom closet to a guest room without asking, effectively displacing me in my own home. When I confronted her, she said she needed more space for her clothes. I decided I had enough. I scheduled an appointment at the county courthouse to file for an unlawful detainer if necessary, and I gathered my documents, ready to start the eviction process if they continued to push. Before taking that step, I called a family meeting in the living room, inviting Ryan and Tiffany to sit down and talk while Ethan napped. They came reluctantly, arms crossed. I told them I had documented every withdrawal, every instance of disrespect, and every unauthorized action, and I laid out the binder of evidence on the coffee table like a stack of cards. Tiffany scoffed, but Ryan leaned forward, reading through the pages. His cheeks turned pale as he saw the numbers and dates in black and white. The reality of their actions confronted him. I explained that what they were doing fit the legal definition of elder financial exploitation, and I could file a police report if necessary, but I still preferred to resolve this within the family. I offered them a choice. Either we come to a written agreement regarding expenses and boundaries, or they move out peacefully within 30 days without financial support from me, and we go our separate ways. Tiffany laughed and said I was bluffing. She said that since I was old and alone, I couldn't handle the house or the bills, and that I needed them more than they needed me. I looked her straight in the eye and said she had underestimated me. I reminded her that I had paid off this house on a grocery clerk's salary while raising a child, and that strength doesn't vanish with age. I also told her that I had already set up a trust and new bank accounts and was prepared to take legal action if she continued to harass me, and I could see doubt flicker across her face. Ryan asked if we could have time to discuss privately, and I agreed, telling them I expected an answer by the weekend. I went to my room and closed the door, leaving them to whisper. That night I barely slept. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but I also felt proud that I had stood up for myself. I clutched my husband's old flannel shirt to my chest and prayed for clarity. The following day, Ryan approached me alone on the porch. He apologized for everything and said he didn't realize how much pain they had caused, but he also asked if I could forgive them if they truly left. I told him forgiveness was possible if there was genuine change, but trust would take time to rebuild. I asked him if he would be willing to attend family counseling with me, and he said he'd consider it. Tiffany, however, had other plans. She packed her belongings and told Ryan she was taking Ethan to her mother's house for the week because she needed a break from toxic energy. Ryan stayed behind, torn between his wife and his mother, and he spent evenings pacing the backyard. He seemed lost without Tiffany's instructions, and for the first time, he asked me for guidance. I told him to take this time to think about what kind of husband and son he wanted to be, and I reminded him that being supportive doesn't mean surrendering your principles. Meanwhile, I continued to consult with Mr. Hernandez, who suggested we draft a formal rental agreement if I decided to let them stay. The document would outline contributions, chores, and respect clauses, leaving no room for ambiguity. We also prepared an eviction notice as a backup. Mr. Hernandez reminded me that eviction can take 30 to 45 days, and that once filed, only the sheriff can enforce it, which made me feel empowered. On Friday, I called the locksmith to rekey the back door, not to lock them out unlawfully, but to secure the house because I had discovered unknown copies of keys missing. The locksmith showed me how to program a keypad. He told me that new smart locks allow me to give each person a unique code, and I thought of how easily I could monitor who entered and left. I felt slightly more secure knowing technology could help me maintain control. I also installed a Ring doorbell from Amazon, thanks to a recommendation from my neighbor. It allowed me to see and speak to anyone at my front door, a small, modern convenience that gave me peace of mind. Saturday morning, I visited the courthouse to file a formal complaint about the attempted fraud with the lender pre-approval. I provided copies of the forged documents, and the clerk said they would investigate. I also filed a restraining order request as a precaution, though I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. The idea of legal paperwork between me and my son devastated me, but I knew I had to protect myself. That afternoon, Tiffany returned with Ethan. She acted as if nothing had happened, and she played nice in front of Ryan. But when she looked at me, her eyes were cold. In the evening, she knocked on my door and handed me a typed letter. It stated that she and Ryan would be moving out within 30 days and expected $25,000 to help cover moving costs and first and last month's rent. I read the letter and burst out laughing, not out of humor, but disbelief. After all the damage, she still thought I would fund her lifestyle, and I shook my head. I wrote "denied" across the letter and handed it back, telling her that I wished them well, but that my money would stay where it belonged, with me, and that I had already documented her request. Tiffany hissed that I would regret it when I was old and alone. I replied that being alone isn't as bad as being surrounded by people who only see you as a wallet. The next morning, Ryan came to me with red eyes. He said Tiffany had given him an ultimatum. Either he got the money from me, or she would file for divorce and move back to Florida with Ethan. His voice cracked as he begged me to reconsider giving them money, saying he didn't want to lose his marriage or his child. My heart twisted, but I stood firm. I told him that if Tiffany was willing to hold Ethan hostage for money, then their marriage was already on shaky ground, and enabling that behavior would only make things worse. We cried together on the porch. It was the first time I'd seen my grown son cry since his father's funeral, and I hugged him, whispering that I would always be there for him, but not his schemes. Over the next week, Ryan slept on the couch while Tiffany packed boxes. She avoided me, and Ethan sensed the sadness clinging to his father and me like a vine to a trellis. I focused on making the house feel like home again. I baked cookies, hung freshly laundered curtains, and organized my closet, tasks that grounded me and reminded me of my capability. I called my insurance agent and switched my homeowner's policy from a small local broker to GEICO, saving $118 per year, a small victory that put a smile on my face. I also began looking up part-time work at Michael's or other craft stores, not because I needed the money, but because I missed having a routine and wanted to meet people who didn't view me as a burden. That week, Ryan took Ethan to the park alone, and Tiffany went to Florida to meet with her mother. The distance seemed to soften Ryan, and he started doing small things like washing dishes and mowing the lawn without being asked. He even fixed the broken fence panel at the side of the house, using tools he borrowed from Home Depot's rental department. And he grinned sheepishly when I thanked him, as if rediscovering his sense of responsibility. Without Tiffany's constant criticism, our conversations grew warmer. We talked about baseball, my late husband, and childhood memories, and I saw him relax into his own skin. One evening, while we sat on the porch drinking Folgers coffee from mismatched mugs, Ryan confessed he felt ashamed of how he had let Tiffany treat me and that he wanted to make things right. He told me he was exploring therapy to address his people-pleasing tendencies, and he asked if I would attend a session with him. I agreed, hoping it could repair our bond. Meanwhile, Mr. Hernandez called to inform me that the lender had flagged the forged pre-approval and would be reporting the matter to authorities, and he said I should prepare for potential legal inquiries. He also said that my restraining order request might be approved due to the fraudulent actions, but he advised me to think carefully about whether I wanted to pursue it, as it could cause permanent rifts. I pondered the choice. A restraining order against my daughter-in-law seemed extreme, but part of me felt it was the only way to protect myself and to send a clear message that boundaries were non-negotiable. Before I made a decision, Tiffany returned from Florida and announced she was filing for divorce. She said she couldn't stay married to a man who wouldn't stand up to his mother, and she planned to move back home. Ryan was devastated, but I could see a strange sense of relief in him. He didn't have to choose between his wife and his mother anymore because the decision was made for him. Tiffany packed her belongings quickly, loading them into a rented U-Haul truck with her brother's help, and she barely said goodbye to me. She kissed Ethan on the forehead and promised to video call. Then she was gone. As the U-Haul pulled away, I felt a mixture of sadness and liberation. The storm that had hovered over our house for months finally dissipated, leaving behind broken branches and muddy footprints. Ryan sobbed in the driveway, his shoulders shaking. I put my arm around him and reminded him that grief and relief can coexist, and that this was an opportunity to rebuild his life with integrity. In the weeks that followed, Ryan and I settled into a new rhythm. He found an apartment nearby and moved out gradually, visiting daily with Ethan, and we worked together to co-parent as grandparents and father. Tiffany called occasionally to speak to Ethan, but she never asked me for money again. She seemed focused on her new life in Florida, posting beach photos and captions about fresh starts on social media. I updated my will, leaving specific amounts to Ethan in a trust that he could access when he turned 25, and I included a clause that if Ryan remarried a spouse who attempted to coerce or manipulate me, they would be excluded. Ryan respected my decisions. He even accompanied me to the attorney's office to sign the documents, and he thanked me for teaching him about boundaries and financial responsibility, albeit through painful lessons. I also attended therapy with Ryan. Our counselor, Ms. Lee, helped us unpack years of unspoken expectations and guilt, and she guided us toward healthier communication. In therapy, I admitted that I often rescued Ryan financially because I loved him, but that I now recognize the need to let him face consequences. He admitted he hid things because he feared disappointing both me and Tiffany. We learned to express needs without manipulation and to listen without defensiveness. The sessions were hard but healing, and I wished we'd done them years earlier. One afternoon after therapy, we stopped at Target to pick up cleaning supplies. In the aisle lined with Clorox wipes and Swiffer dusters, we joked about our inability to operate fancy espresso machines, and we laughed freely. That night at home, I realized I hadn't thought about the lease or the rent demand in days. Instead, I was focused on building something new with my son and cherishing every moment with Ethan. Still, I couldn't forget the depth of Tiffany's manipulation. I decided to turn my experience into a cautionary tale. So I reached out to Grace's Stories and offered to share my story anonymously. Grace responded with warmth and invited me to chat on her channel. She said my story could help other seniors recognize red flags and protect themselves, and that felt like turning pain into purpose. During our conversation, I recounted the confrontation at the kitchen table, the bank meetings, the legal consultations, and the moment I found my wedding earrings missing, and her audience left hundreds of comments expressing outrage and support. Reading those comments made me cry. Strangers from New York, Texas, and Oregon said they felt seen, and they thanked me for speaking out, reminding me of the community that exists for people like me. One comment said, "Justice served cold." Another said, "Smart, calm, and lawful." And a woman named Sandra wrote that my story reminded her of her own family, proving that our experiences resonate across the country. I ended the interview by telling listeners to document everything, consult professionals, and remember that love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity, a message I wished someone had told me sooner. After the video aired, I received a letter from Tiffany's attorney requesting that I refrain from publicly disparaging her, and I forwarded it to Mr. Hernandez, who responded that sharing my truth was protected speech. I chuckled at the irony. Tiffany, who had tried to control me, was now attempting to control my voice, but I knew I was within my rights, and I refused to be silenced. A month later, I received a postcard from Tiffany's mother, of all people, apologizing for her daughter's behavior and saying she hoped we could move forward peacefully. I appreciated the sentiment, but kept my guard up. Meanwhile, Ryan started a new job at a local auto parts store, earning a modest salary but feeling proud of his independence. He came over for dinner twice a week, often bringing food from the Kroger where he did his shopping. Ethan thrived. He spent Saturdays with me baking cookies and Sundays at the park with his father, and his vocabulary expanded to include phrases like respect and Nana's house, which made me grin. Over time, my finances stabilized. With only myself to support, my utility bills decreased, and I was able to replenish my savings, adding $100 each month to my emergency fund. I also treated myself occasionally, buying a new set of Pyrex bowls and a pair of walking shoes from Kohl's, small things that signaled I could prioritize my needs without guilt. One day, I received an invitation to Tiffany's new wedding. She was remarrying a man named Brad in Florida, and for a moment I pondered attending out of curiosity, but I ultimately declined, sending a polite card and nothing more. Ryan laughed at the idea of attending and said he preferred to take Ethan to the zoo instead. We spent that day watching giraffes and feeding goats, and it felt like freedom. Months later, my phone buzzed with a Chase fraud alert while I was in the lumber aisle at Home Depot. This time, the alert was for a separate debit card I used for online purchases, and I appreciated the bank's vigilance. I told the cashier I needed a minute, stepped aside, and confirmed with the bank that the transaction was legitimate. It was for a $79 craft kit from Michael's I had ordered the night before, and I smiled at the irony. Life settled into a rhythm. I maintained my trust, kept my bank account separate, and updated my passwords regularly, mindful of the lessons I'd learned. On Ethan's third birthday, we gathered at a picnic table in the park with a homemade chocolate cake. Ryan and I sang loud while Ethan clapped his hands, and there was no tension, only joy. I thought back to the cold open of my story, the moment Ryan demanded rent, and I marveled at how far we had come from that kitchen confrontation to this peaceful afternoon under the sun. I realized my revenge wasn't about destroying anyone. It was about teaching them that I owned more than a house. I owned my dignity, my time, my boundaries, and my capacity to love without being used. Ryan thanked me that day for giving him tough love. He said he had learned more from my boundaries than from all the times I bailed him out, and his words were worth more than any check. As I sat on the park bench watching Ethan blow out his candles, I felt the weight of the past year lift. The wounds had healed into scars, reminders of a battle fought and won quietly. I looked around at my friends, my church group, and my neighbors who had become like family, and I felt grateful. Community had been my armor when my own kin turned against me. On my 69th birthday, I treated myself to a trip to a small bed and breakfast in Napa Valley. I drove my Camry along winding roads, sipping Folgers from a thermos, and the miles felt like freedom. That night, I journaled about the past year, writing about the kitchen table confrontation, the lawyer visits, the trust, the brand names that had popped into my days like characters in a play, and the conclusion of one chapter. As summer faded into fall, the house felt both quieter and lighter. I decorated the porch with pumpkins from a local farmer's market and hung a wreath I made with supplies from Michael's. I joined a quilting group at the community center. Our circle of women met every Tuesday at 10 in the morning, sipping Folgers and trading stories while stitching squares that told our histories in fabric. During one meeting, a woman named Gladys mentioned that her son had tried to forge her signature on a bank loan, and the group groaned in unison. We shared resources and promised to watch out for each other. Knowing that other seniors face similar betrayals fueled my passion to advocate, so I volunteered with a local nonprofit focused on elder abuse prevention, offering to share my story and assist with educational workshops. At our first workshop, held in the town library's meeting room, I stood behind a podium, my heart racing, and told a room of 20 strangers about the day my son demanded rent. I saw tears in the eyes of a man in the front row as I described how Tiffany used Ethan as leverage. Later, he told me his daughter had done the same with his grandkids, and he thanked me. We handed out pamphlets with hotline numbers and bullet points like document everything, consult an attorney, and trust your gut, and the attendees scribbled notes diligently. After the workshop, a young woman approached me and said she worked for Wells Fargo. She offered to connect our nonprofit with a financial literacy program for seniors, and I felt hope at the idea of building partnerships. On the drive home, my old Camry's check engine light flickered. I pulled over and called AAA for assistance, and the operator promised a tow truck within 45 minutes. While waiting, I sat on the hood of my car, feeling the crisp autumn air, and I reflected on how reliant we become on systems, banks, cars, insurance, and how important it is to know your rights within them. The tow truck driver arrived, a cheerful man named Mike, and he loaded my car carefully. He chatted about his mother's love of jigsaw puzzles and told me he admired my independence. Mike dropped me at a local auto shop where the mechanic diagnosed a faulty oxygen sensor. I paid the $275 repair bill with my GEICO roadside reimbursement card, grateful for the insurance. While my car was in the shop, I stopped at a Starbucks and treated myself to a pumpkin spice latte, a small luxury, and I watched teenagers with backpacks order cold brews, smiling at their energy. Back home, I received a call from Mr. Hernandez. He informed me that the investigation into the forged pre-approval had concluded and that Tiffany had been charged with attempted fraud, though likely she would receive probation due to a plea deal. He said that because she was now out of state and had no prior record, the court was inclined to impose fines rather than jail time, but she would have a criminal mark on her record. Hearing that the system worked, even imperfectly, gave me closure. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability and ensuring she couldn't repeat the behavior with someone else. A week later, Tiffany sent me a handwritten apology letter. She wrote that she was going through a difficult time and that her actions were influenced by insecurity and fear of failing socially. She admitted that seeing her friends' lavish lifestyles on social media made her desperate to keep up, and she acknowledged that she had projected that pressure onto me, hurting our family. The letter was sincere enough to soften me slightly, though I remained cautious. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, but it allows us to set down the bitterness we carry. I wrote back thanking her for her apology and wishing her well. I told her that I hoped she would seek counseling to understand why she equated status with worth, and I left it at that. Life continued quietly. Ryan came over often with Ethan, sometimes bringing a bag of groceries from Publix that he picked up during a business trip to Florida, a small courtesy that made me smile. We started a tradition of watching classic movies on Friday nights. Ethan loved the musical numbers, and I introduced him to The Sound of Music, singing along to Do Re Mi while he twirled. Occasionally, Tiffany would video call. Ethan would show her his latest Lego creation and blow kisses, and she would compliment his building skills and ask about preschool, but she never addressed me directly. I was okay with that. Our boundaries were clear, and I had no desire to rehash old wounds. I focused on the bright eyes of my grandson and the man my son was becoming. During the holiday season, Ryan invited me to his apartment for Thanksgiving. His living room held a small artificial tree from Target and a wreath from Costco, and he proudly showed off his thrifted dining table. We cooked together. I brought stuffing in a Pyrex dish, and he roasted a turkey while Ethan smashed sweet potatoes with a fork, his cheeks smeared with orange. Before eating, we held hands and said grace. Ryan thanked me for my guidance and apologized again for the pain he caused, and I squeezed his hand, feeling peace settle like soft snow. After dinner, we pulled out a Monopoly board, and Ethan pretended to count the colorful money. When he tried to buy Boardwalk with his last $5, we laughed together at his ambition. As the evening ended, Ryan walked me to my car and said he had applied for a manager position at an auto parts store. He was hopeful, and I encouraged him, proud of his initiative. Later that week, I met with my financial advisor, Karen, to review my accounts. She remarked that my careful budgeting and wise investments meant I could live comfortably for the next 20 years without worry. Karen suggested I consider small charitable donations each year to reduce tax liabilities. I decided to contribute $500 to the elder abuse nonprofit that had supported me, a gesture of gratitude. I also purchased a life alert device, something I had long resisted. The representative on the phone explained that the subscription included a lockbox on my door for emergency personnel, and I realized independence includes safety measures. I hung the Life Alert pendant around my neck and felt a slight weight. It was a reminder that being proactive about my health is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. In January, our community center hosted a legal seminar. A county clerk from the recorder's office explained the importance of keeping property deeds up to date and discussed the steps to record a transfer properly. She reiterated that forging a deed is a felony and that any legitimate transfer requires notarization and witness signatures. And I nodded, thankful I had learned this the hard way, rather than the hardest way. After the seminar, I spoke with the clerk about my living trust. She said I had done everything correctly and that my documentation would prevent confusion, and I felt validated. In February, the church organized a Valentine's dinner for widows and widowers. We decorated the fellowship hall with paper hearts and drank sweet tea from mason jars while a local trio played love songs. I danced with an older gentleman named Earl, whose wife passed 5 years ago. We swayed gently to unchained melody, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel romance without guilt or comparison. Earl and I began walking together in the mornings at the park. We talked about our grandchildren, our favorite soups, and the joy of gardening, and our companionship blossomed naturally. One morning, Earl handed me a bouquet of daisies from his garden and said he admired my resilience. His words warmed me, and I felt open to whatever the next chapter might bring. In March, I received a call from the county courthouse. They informed me that the restraining order I had filed months earlier was unnecessary now that Tiffany lived out of state and had no plans to return, so I withdrew it. I marveled at the change in circumstance. What once felt like an inevitable war had cooled into a distant memory, and I was grateful for the resolution. Ryan's divorce finalized quietly. The court granted joint legal custody of Ethan with physical custody, alternating between Ryan in California and Tiffany in Florida during school breaks. Though it meant long flights, Ethan handled it well. At the exchange handoffs, Ryan and Tiffany were civil. They spoke about flight schedules and Ethan's reading progress, and they kept their personal issues out of his earshot, a victory for maturity. As Ethan grew older, he began to ask questions about why his parents lived in different states. We answered honestly but gently, emphasizing that families can look different, but love remains. Ryan and I continued to co-parent with kindness. He invited me to his dating world slowly, introducing me to a new girlfriend after 6 months. Her name was Lisa, and she worked at a local library. Lisa was warm and seemed genuinely interested in our family's dynamics. She asked about my quilting and offered to help at the elder abuse nonprofit, and I saw qualities I liked. Meanwhile, I found joy in small indulgences. I subscribed to Consumer Cellular for a cheaper phone plan, saving $20 per month, and I used the extra money to take a painting class at the community college. My instructor praised the way I captured sunlight on canvas, and the class gave me a creative outlet. I painted my kitchen table with a new perspective, turning a place of conflict into a still life. With each brushstroke, I felt healing. I remembered the moment Ryan demanded rent and painted the shadow under his chin, but I also painted the light on the mug that anchored me. That summer, the nonprofit asked me to speak at a state conference. I traveled to Sacramento with my friend Marcia, staying in a modest hotel and presenting my story to a crowd of social workers, attorneys, and seniors. I began my speech with the cold open, the day my son asked me to pay rent, and I watched the audience gasp. I then walked them through the legal steps, the emotional roller coaster, and the eventual resolution. Afterward, a social worker approached me and said my story would help her advise clients facing similar situations. She said hearing the specific numbers and processes made the issue feel concrete and solvable. On the way home, Marcia and I stopped at an In-N-Out burger. We ate burgers and laughed about how we had once shared ramen in college, and I felt young again. In August, a heat wave hit and my air conditioning broke. I called a repairman, but he couldn't come for 2 days. So I drove to Lowe's and bought a $129 window unit, lugging it into my living room like a champion. The Lowe's employee offered to carry it to my car, but I insisted on doing it myself. As sweat dripped down my brow, I felt strong and independent, even at 69. I installed the unit with a screwdriver my husband had left me, and as cool air filled the room, I laughed at the absurdity of once fearing I couldn't handle a house alone. September came, and with it Ethan's first day of kindergarten. He wore a backpack half his size and grinned with 2 missing front teeth. Ryan and I stood proudly on either side, taking photos. I knitted Ethan a navy blue scarf for winter and tucked a note into his lunchbox, reminding him to be kind. Later, he told me he shared his cookies with a boy who forgot his snack, making me beam. In November, I planned a small holiday gathering at my house. I invited Ryan, Lisa, Marcia, Earl, and a few members of my quilting group. We lit candles that smelled like cinnamon and played carols. The evening was filled with laughter, stories about misadventures at Costco, and debates over the best brand of dish detergent. Those conversations felt so normal and warm, a stark contrast to the tension of previous holidays. At one point, we all raised our glasses of sparkling cider, and I proposed a toast to boundaries, to resilience, and to love that doesn't demand we diminish ourselves, and everyone clinked glasses. As the year wound down, I received a Christmas card from Tiffany. Inside was a photo of her, Ethan, and her new husband on a beach with the caption, "Peace and Love," and a note wishing me well. I placed the card on my refrigerator among other pictures. It took courage to display it, but it reminded me that healing can look like cordial distance, and that Ethan deserved to see his mother on my wall. On New Year's Eve, I sat on my couch with Earl, watching the ball drop in Times Square on my new television from Best Buy, and we counted down with the crowd, holding hands gently. At midnight, we shared a kiss on the cheek and toasted with sparkling grape juice. I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for the lessons learned and the hope ahead. As the new year dawned, I reflected on the journey from betrayal to empowerment, from being blindsided at my kitchen table to standing behind podiums and inspiring others. It felt like a lifetime. I acknowledged the mistakes I had made, rescuing Ryan too much, avoiding confrontation for too long, and forgave myself, vowing to keep learning and adjusting as life unfolded. The nonprofit asked me to contribute to a handbook about elder financial abuse prevention. I wrote a chapter on trust planning and family conversations, using bullet points and plain language to make the information accessible. I included side notes like, always get signatures notarized, never share passwords, and beware of social media pressure, along with my own story as an example. The handbook circulated among community centers and banks. One day, my bank teller at Chase recognized my name and thanked me for helping her grandmother avoid signing over her house to a scheming cousin. In spring, Ryan called and excitedly told me he had been promoted to manager, and he was buying a certified pre-owned Honda Accord. He said he'd paid for it himself and didn't need co-signers, and I cheered. I went with him to pick up the car from the dealership. Ethan climbed into the back seat and exclaimed how roomy it was, and I marveled at the shift from asking me for $75,000 to proudly buying a used car. On the ride home, we stopped at a Shell station to fill the tank. Ryan paid with his own debit card, and I took a photo of him by the pump, telling him how proud I was. In June, I celebrated Ethan's 6th birthday at my house. We set up a slip and slide on the lawn and grilled hamburgers. Lisa brought a homemade lemonade made with Meyer lemons from her father's tree. Tiffany couldn't attend due to work, but she sent a gift through the mail, a Lego set, and Ethan happily opened it, thanking her on a video call. I appreciated her attempt to maintain connection. Later that summer, I discovered a small leak under my kitchen sink. Instead of calling Ryan or panicking, I went to YouTube, watched a repair video, and drove to Ace Hardware for a new P-trap. The employee at Ace explained how to install it. I bought the $14 part, went home, and fixed the leak myself, feeling competent and independent, not just in finances, but in home maintenance. That afternoon, I sat at the same kitchen table where my story began, sipping Folgers coffee, and I smiled at the sink cabinet, proud of the new shiny pipe I had installed with my own hands. I opened my scrapbook and added photos from the past year, me speaking at the conference, Ryan with his Honda, Ethan in his kindergarten outfit, and me holding daisies from Earl. As I glued the pictures, I realized that the revenge I had sought wasn't about hurting Tiffany. It was about reclaiming my narrative and showing my son that love includes boundaries. In the margins of the scrapbook page, I wrote quotes like, "Document everything," "Consent matters," and "Fairness is not the same as surrender," reminders of the lessons that changed me. One day in July, I received a call from a woman named Nancy who said she found my name through Grace's stories. She was facing a similar situation with her daughter and asked if we could talk. We spoke for 2 hours. I listened to her tears and offered her the same advice Linda and Karen had given me. She thanked me profusely and later sent me a photo of her house with a sold sign after she decided to downsize on her own terms. The connections forged from my story became part of my healing. Each person I helped added a layer of purpose to the pain I had endured. In August, I flew to Texas to visit my cousin. At the airport, I used my TSA pre-check, proud of my planning, and on the flight, I wrote in my journal about how far I had come. My cousin and I visited a local PNC bank branch to open a new checking account for her business. The teller recognized me from my elder abuse advocacy and asked for advice on how to talk to her own mother about finances. Back in California, I resumed my daily walks with Earl. One evening, he surprised me with tickets to a play at our community theater, a production of Steel Magnolias, and we laughed and cried together in the darkened auditorium. After the play, we went to a diner and shared a slice of apple pie topped with Land O'Lakes whipped cream, and he asked if I would consider traveling with him next year. I said yes, thinking about exploring national parks together. The idea of seeing Yellowstone or Zion in my 70s filled me with excitement rather than fear. When I got home, I logged onto my laptop and updated my travel fund spreadsheet. I allocated $200 a month for future adventures, delighted at the thought of saving for joy rather than crisis. In September, Ethan started first grade. I helped him with his homework at my kitchen table, guiding his hand as he practiced writing cursive letters, and he asked why we write in script. I told him that cursive connects letters like families connect hearts, and he smiled, connecting the loops on the page while I connected the loops of our history. One crisp October morning, I attended a seminar at the Senior Center about online scams. A representative from the district attorney's office explained red flags like urgent emails and promised prizes, and I took notes. The representative mentioned that if you suspect someone is attempting to exploit your finances, contact law enforcement and the county clerk and keep a record of all interactions, advice that mirrored my experience. Leaving the seminar, I stopped at Walmart to pick up yarn for a new blanket. In the aisle, I overheard 2 women discussing how their children were asking for access to their online banking, and I gently advised them to be cautious. They asked me if my story was the one on Grace's channel. I nodded, and they hugged me, saying I saved them from making a costly mistake, and tears sprang to my eyes. In November, I took part in a roundtable at the State Bar's annual meeting, representing the voices of elders. Attorneys, judges, and advocates listened as I urged them to simplify forms and improve outreach. A judge remarked that hearing a personal story gave him a renewed sense of responsibility. He promised to push for clearer language in court notices so seniors wouldn't feel intimidated or confused. As I left the meeting, a reporter asked me for a quote. I looked into her camera and said, "No one should have to fight their own family for basic respect. But if you must, know the law is on your side." The clip aired on the local news, and my phone rang with messages from friends and church members saying they were proud. My story had moved beyond the kitchen and into the broader community. In December, as holiday lights flickered on houses around me, I sat with my quilting group, our fingers busy, and we discussed our resolutions. Mine was to continue advocating and to keep learning. I also resolved to be kinder to myself, to let go of guilt, and to embrace joy without waiting for the other shoe to drop, a lesson that had taken 6 decades to learn. On Christmas Eve, Ryan and Lisa joined me at church. The sanctuary glowed with candles, and as we sang Silent Night, I glanced at my son and felt profound gratitude for second chances. After the service, we returned home to hot cocoa topped with whipped cream and marshmallows. We exchanged gifts. Ryan gave me a new crock pot and I gave him a set of tools, and we laughed about our transformation. As the year ended, I filmed a short video for Grace's channel, thanking viewers for their support and reminding them to check on their elderly neighbors, to ask questions, and to believe survivors. In that video, I repeated a lesson I had written in my journal. You can teach people how to treat you at any age, and I looked into the camera with conviction. Comments poured in. People from all over said they were listening from Texas, Washington, and Georgia, and they shared their own stories, creating a tapestry of experience and empathy. Reading those comments, I realized that my revenge had evolved into a mission to educate and empower, to turn one family's conflict into a community's catalyst for change. As I close this chapter, I think back to that first cold morning when Ryan demanded rent, and I smile because the person sitting here now is stronger, wiser, and still mothering, but on her own terms. My story isn't a fairy tale. It's a journey through betrayal, legal paperwork, bank appointments, and courtrooms, but it ends with dignity restored and relationships rebuilt on honesty. To anyone listening who feels alone in a similar battle, know that you are not alone. There is a community ready to support you, professionals who can guide you, and laws designed to protect you. Thank you for following my journey. Your support has been my second wind, and your comments, whether "she deserved better," "justice served cold," or "this made me cry," have reminded me that stories have power. As you close this, I invite you to share your thoughts and tell me where you're listening from. What would you have done in my shoes? And how have you set boundaries with loved ones? My name is Carol, and this is the story of how I taught my son and his wife, who owns what, reclaim my life, and found peace without losing myself.